show. It's .NET Rocks! You know, it's beer o'clock at NDC now.
This is not a subdued crowd.
No, not a subdued crowd at all.
So we're here in Oslo. This is our Going Serverless panel. We're here with a few guests. We're going to have some fun, and then you're going to drink some beer.
Or more beer, as the case may be.
Or more beer. I'd like to start with Rob Connery. Rob helps developers of all sorts learn what's new with technology. He's been working in the technology field full-time since 1998 as a DBA and then a web developer. His original focus was the Microsoft ASP.NET Stack, building tools like Subsonic and the first micro-ORM Massive. Little irony in that name right there.
Like that? A long time ago.
Next to him is Lynn Langett. She's a cloud and big data architect, AWS community hero, Google Cloud developer expert, Microsoft Azure insider, MVP, and lynda.com author. Wow. When do you sleep?
Yeah,
that's what I want to know. She does it all. She's currently working on IoT cloud projects, and Lynn is also the director and lead courseware developer for the nonprofit Teaching Kids Programming,
which we've done a whole show on in the past.
Yeah. And finally, all the way to the right here, or your left, is Matthias Brandewiner. He's been developing software on .NET for about 10 years and loving every minute of it, except maybe for a few release days.
I'm thinking all the early ASP.NET Core releases. Those were pretty tough.
Yeah. His language of choice was C# until he discovered F# and fell in love with it. He enjoys arguing about code and how to make it better and gets very excited when discussing TDD or F#. Don't discuss them in the same conversation or you'll be hurting. Matthias is a Microsoft F# MVP and founder of Clear Lines Consulting. A big hand for our panel. So in the 90s and the 2000s, we had our servers, and then we had our cloud, and there were servers in the cloud, and now you're telling us to take our servers away. What are you guys doing? What are they doing to us? Discuss.
Nice. We're going to sit over here.
You do have to start with the name serverless. It is a problem.
Yeah, it is a problem, isn't it?
There is servers, right?
Yes.
Does it make you cringe? Does it make you cringe hearing that?
It probably should be called ceremonyless.
I would say that's about right.
Less ceremonial.
At some point, it was called nanoservices. I don't know which one is worse.
Nanoservices.
That's good.
As opposed to microservices.
How far down can we get?
Yeah.
I mean, what's after nanoservices?
Pico services.
Pico.
That's it. Yeah.
I like the way Scott Hanselman describes it, which is you're a slider and your credit card and some code. That's serverless, pretty much, I think. Huh?
It's all about that credit card, actually.
Exactly right.
This is sort of the least ceremony you could get. I'm just going to write my code, run it for me, and then run it as many times as somebody asks for it.
And only charge me for when it runs.
Yeah.
Or not at all.
Or not at all, if it's not running.
Yeah, which is really the big deal.
Well, no, I have
Even if
I
it is
have
running?
clients that are running on free tiers and
really?
running quite nicely. Yeah. Yeah. One of them that probably a lot of you guys have heard of is A Cloud Guru. They very notoriously started their own site, which was Amazon training, on the Amazon free tier serverless. And I think they're up to like 20, 30,000 users a month, and they're still on the free tier.
They're still on the free tier. That's sort of circumventing the concept of the free tier is supposed to get you started, and then you eventually pay, right?
Well, the idea is that you're going to pay for premium services like machine learning and stuff like that.
Right.
But if you're just using pure storage and compute, there are use cases that make sense on free tier.
Doesn't everything make sense free? Isn't that? I'd like free everything.
Yeah.
But, eventually they're going to go out of business because there is no business. So how do they do that?
Yeah, I don't know how long that lasts.
Yeah.
I've always interpreted this whole serverless movement as started sort of by the community where they demanded the concept of Lambda from AWS. Does anybody else have a narrative for how this started? No? Do you disagree with?
Well, for me, it started with Lambda. I mean, I was at reInvent, and it was like a bomb dropped when Lambda launched, and there was this just incredible momentum from developers, this frenzy, and people were building things right at reInvent.
While you're watching it being presented, you start writing code.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, like when I was at reInvent this year and they announced Athena, which is serverless SQL, literally there was a guy that before the end of the demo got something in production and he tweeted it. Yeah.
Wow.
It was probably Steve Sanderson.
Yeah, that sounds about like it.
He's kind of magical that way.
I've seen a bit the same thing on the Azure side. So I have no experience with the Lambdas, but what I have found about this is extremely liberating. So you started as a DBA. I'm not an IT guy by background. I have very little patience for IT. This is not what I want to do. And it was just shocking to me. I could just take a script, ship it, and have something in production. Like, this is amazing. And so, people just picked it up, and it's, you just write a couple of lines of code and it runs. It's magic.
And in your preferred world, Matthias, is Azure Functions?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. And it's hard to argue with that. I just feel like this is not well represented. I wonder if it's just fatigue.
Yeah.
That there's so much has changed so quickly in the cloud between the IaaS versus PaaS versus containers. Do you want Kubernetes? Do you want Docker? And then they come along and go, hey, you could just do serverless. And like, A, lie, because there's a server. And B, like, I've looked at enough stuff, thanks. Do I have to look at this too?
Yeah.
My question is, when do you stop doing serverless functions and go to a more robust microservices framework? I mean, I know that long-running things don't work, right? We know that, but if somebody's got a whole business based on, microservices, and they're planning to use maybe, Azure Service Fabric or something like that, and somebody comes along and says, no, we don't need any of that. We can just do these functions. Are they crazy, or is it doable?
The big enterprise project that I worked on last year was blended architecture. It was kind of interesting because the developers that came in were kind of old school, and they said, oh, we don't even want to use containers, much less serverless. And so we fired them. And we brought in some new people. And
that's one answer.
We got most of it built serverlessly, but there was an implementation we had to do a custom security pairing. It was an IoT thing, and it was long running.
Okay.
And so we used the Nano solution.
Sure.
So it was blended.
That makes sense.
And I'm thinking that that's going to be more typical in the enterprise, that you're going to have blended stuff because there's hard limits on Lambda.
But is long running the only thing? I mean, why would you? I mean, I get all the good stuff that comes with Service Fabric for scaling and all of that stuff. What do you get that just built in without any controls in functions?
It was also control because it was a security functionality. Like, we wanted to be able to SSH into the servers. We wanted to be able to make sure the service was 100% up. We wanted to have the level of control because the pattern of lambdas firing lambdas wasn't fast enough for us for authentication. We tried it, but it didn't work.
Because each Lambda is effectively a security boundary. So there's a lot of authenticating and re-authenticating.
Well, and there's latency when it comes up.
Sure.
And it was too much latency in our case.
Oh, all right. Is that the case with Azure Functions as well?
You have a cold start.
Yeah, it's cold start. Yeah, it's cold start.
So once it's fired, it's going to be pretty fast, but the first call will take a tiny bit of time.
The first call after compiling?
Yeah.
Same with Firebase as well.
Even later than compiling, because you don't pay because things go kind of to sleep.
Oh, right, sure.
Yep.
So in that sense, there you go. There's another reason why you don't want to do that.
But we were up against the same thing even with ASP.NET pages and things. Like, eventually, .NET shuts stuff down if you're not calling it often enough. I guess the question is how frequently I have to call that you don't have cold starts.
I think that depends on what you want to do. So it's to go back to the question of when you would want to use a function or not, is like in my case, I started from scripts. So small applications, there are places which are no-brainers. Like, if you have a job which runs once a week, takes a minute, you should just do that because you're going to pay 1 minute a month. And now is I'm looking at things where at what point is it a bad idea? And I wish I had the answer to that. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
You have to test it, basically.
Yeah. That's okay. One of the nice things about Firebase that I found is it's just easy to add on little projects. And you find yourself doing that in a natural way, to answer your question about microservices. So I made a cart thing, and it turned into a checkout thing. And then I thought, well, what about delivery? And I was like, I just made another app. And then I gave it a different URL. And then I thought about, well, what about notifications and other things?
Checkoutthing.com.
Yeah, I made another thing. It was really neat to just tack all those things together. And I'm writing all the data into Postgres anyway because I don't trust Firebase.
Okay.
Now, should we talk? I mean, everybody sort of gets Amazon, certainly gets Azure. Tell us a little bit about Firebase here, Rob.
Firebase was a real-time database. That was their only claim to fame a few years back. And then Google bought them. So now they're part of the Google Cloud initiative. And it's a real-time database. You get authentication, you get storage, you get functions. I'm missing a few in there. You get all these really insanely amazing triggers and I say that because you can reach out to just about anything and get a trigger off of it, like a Google Analytics event. When someone uploads a thing, like a file to the servers, you can trigger a function.
Right.
Someone writes to the real-time database, which they do right from the browser, that'll trigger a function. As a matter of fact, that's how people actually check out on the site that I wrote is the checkout information, the items, and the payment from the token from Stripe just gets written to the database. There's no AJAX call that I'm making.
Right.
No separate invocation.
Yeah, and that just triggers a function. It goes bing, 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 bing. And it's amazing too, because to what you said about the latency between the functions, I didn't even notice it. And it was enough that I could do a real-time checkout where I'm checking a progress flag on the client and watching all the functions go off and little check marks tick. And
nice.
Then, it's done with the order. It was pretty neat to see.
And so in the Azure land, do we have the similar ways to trigger functions, or do we?
That's kind of what I enjoyed about it. Is like most of the scenarios are there. You have like timers which are obvious.
Yeah.
You have the queue. You have an HTTP request. You have hooks to GitHub, to all these things. You can write your own and add them. So, and that's one of the nice things, because like most of the scenarios I wanted to cover just there out of the box, so I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, in the brownfield scenario where we're coming from VMs or any other number of things, it feels like, and we're going through this with the .NET Rock site alone, right? We started off with one VM that was all the things, and then just started peeling out websites and so forth. I got to imagine like you'd be in hybrid for forever, like actually turning stuff off completely is rare. You just keep peeling more pieces out. Maybe they're functions, maybe they come in another form.
So then I'm kind of curious also about what's happening in the other sides, because I haven't touched anything but Azure Functions. But so one question is like, how big, at what point is it a bad idea to put many functions? Like a friend of mine has something with, I think, 140 lambdas, but he made that work.
140.
Yes.
Okay.
That's one direction where it's tricky, because at that point it's like, how do you keep track of what's actually going on in your app? Right. The other one is like, I started doing something which is in a hybrid app where I have like something which is a Windows server with a Windows service, and I want to call the functions, and how to make that work together. I don't have the patterns quite yet, and which is kind of what I find interesting in the field, because it makes lots of problems simple. But then it's like you have lots of problems which were simple before, and you have no patterns. So it's both scary and exciting, I guess.
That's definitely true. I mean, in the project I worked on, we had continuous deployment pipeline. And so we did the cattle, not pets, a pattern where every time you have new code, you just kill the VM and then you have a new one. And when we refactored to functions, we went through that process.
Right.
Yeah.
And we had kind of an interim point where we tried containers, but containers actually didn't provide us with value, which was an interesting learning to me. We just went from...
So I don't know if you know this, Lynn, but containers are the new hotness.
I'm curious as to why. You know, what was it about your particular thing that made containers not valuable?
It was container orchestration is kind of an immature area right now.
And a lot of work.
But what kind of
exactly.
What kind of things are you doing in the functions that might clue us into?
Well, what we were doing was enterprise IoT, and so it was a phone app to control enterprise IoT. So it was a CRUD model basically, but with MQTT. Okay. So it was easily refactorable because it was the different kinds of messages lend themselves to that.
Yeah.
So, but to me, that was a big learning because I thought that we might have some value out of Docker as an interim solution because it was less a technology problem and more a learning problem for the team.
Sure.
Like they were running off getting certified and all this stuff, but Docker didn't really help.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like the effort to decompose out of the sort of traditional monolith model.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easier to stop at containers than it would be just go directly to serverless.
It hasn't been in the two clients I've worked with.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm in this group, Amazon Community Heroes, which is like MVPs. And it's an interesting group because they are in these really high volume sites like Reddit and Netflix and stuff like that. And their report working at those levels in the Amazon ecosystem is similar. That for Amazon, a lot of people are just going straight to Lambda.
Wow. The one thing I sort of saw in the orchestration management space, or maybe you could even lay this on Azure API management, is just like being able to deal with a bad actor. Somebody who's just almost, you know, it costs you money for every call. So if somebody winds up and is just calling you 1 million times an hour for no good reason, how do you stop that account?
I don't have a good answer to that.
Self-destruct mechanism.
Well, I would think that the Azure API management service, and I only know about that because Vishwas Lila taught us on another show, that you would put that in front of your Azure function so that it's putting the gates on those things.
Yeah, so I can't really speak that much about the proxy or the Azure proxies. Like I know they built that so that you can build an API in front, and then it's like you don't have to deal with the functions themselves. Like you pipe them there. My use case has been more enterprisey, maybe. So it's not in that I have used it mainly to build Twitter bots.
Right.
So
and you're not exposing it to the public. It's your apps that are calling them.
Correct. And so most of what I have been doing is like queues, because I like queues.
Apparently it's only you.
So I'm getting back to this whole idea about, you know, Docker and value of Docker versus functions. And I'm trying to think of, you know, I guess people love Docker because they can just go from one cloud platform to another
Yeah,
very easily.
there is
Whereas,
that. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're writing a C# function,
Yeah. Well, it's a familiar paradigm, right? Because like before you had a VHD file, and now you have a Docker file.
Right.
Yeah.
So like the DevOps people are much more comfortable with that.
Well,
like,
plus being able to execute on the developer's machine,
Yeah.
on the QA machine,
Right.
onto the production machine.
yeah.
right. I mean, I talked about it in my talk here. My experience has been the DevOps people in enterprise freak out when you start putting functions in continuous deployment pipelines because they have to learn all new tools.
Right.
Like, and the vendors are catching up. Like Amazon has X-Ray now, which is pretty cool, and Google's Stack Driver's pretty solid there. And I assume Microsoft has something now, but they have to learn a lot of new stuff. They can't follow their typical processes to understand what's going on with functions.
Interesting.
Do you have then thoughts also on, so on the question of containers? I think you brought up the fact that it can be run pretty much everywhere you want. Because the one topic which pops up is a vendor lock-in. It's like if I decide to that I don't want an Azure function anymore, I'm not sure how I would extricate myself, and a container will run everywhere.
Right, right. Well, because the functions, whether it's Firebase or Amazon or function, they're specific to the platform, and you kind of have to be online, right? Like developing in the airplane is going to be tough.
This is the funny thing about Firebase is you can write your code to be free of their framework. Believe it or not, yeah, you can. So one of the things they have is an HTTPS trigger. So it's just an endpoint.
Yep.
And you can write code, the function code the way you see in the demos, or you can just create an Express app and pass the Express app to the function. And then you have your full value that you would have with Express. And then if you need to pick up and move, you just take your Express app and go host it somewhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so that was fascinating. And you don't get the real-time database and all the auth stuff.
Right.
You still have a level of platform lock-in. But when I tried Lambda, that was the first thing I thought is there's nothing getting me out of here. Although it was Node, but it didn't have the same level of like just light touch that you have with Firebase that I really liked.
Because in theory, you could pick up that Node code and stick it in a container, and it's basically the same code. It's just now you're owning the infrastructure that it runs in.
Yeah, that's it. That's the feeling that I think the Firebase team is trying to go for. That's just here's a little bit of orchestration to give you, and then off you go.
So you have an option of a local runtime. You want to run it on-prem, go ahead.
Not that I know of.
That's not really what Express is about.
Well, you can. I mean, you can set your code up. You don't have to use their real-time database. It's just there for you.
Sure.
Same with their pub sub and a bunch of other things. But if you needed to pull that app out and go on your own servers, it requires work. But it's not a dead stop.
No, and it's not like rewrite everything either.
No, it's not.
But I would argue, what are you writing your functions in, Matthias? Like, is this C#?
F sharp.
F sharp.
Big surprise.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah, like it's all F sharp, but at that point, I think it's so C# is supported, JavaScript, Bash, like PHP, which is kind of interesting because one of the benefits of a function is like it allows you to focus on the business value and not the infrastructure.
There is no infrastructure at this point, really.
Right.
Yeah, but like the infrastructure doesn't care about the code. Like it picks it up and essentially you tell it, these are my bindings, and like call some code, and it doesn't really care what it's written in. So it's like for me, I care about the code and they care about the whole infrastructure. So.
Absolutely.
If you guys could just hold that thought right there, we'll take a few minutes to pay the bills.
This episode of .NET Rocks is made possible in part by Windows on the Google Cloud Platform.
What? Isn't this a .NET show?
Yeah, .NET runs on the Google Cloud Platform, man.
Everything in .NET?
You bet. All the .NET Core libraries and more, including 200 plus Google.com and cloud services. Hey, John Skeet's behind it. He's a genius.
The John Skeet? The Rescue the Princess John Skeet from Stack Overflow?
Yeah, the one and only. You can deploy your ASP.NET Windows apps to Compute Engine or your ASP.NET Core apps to App Engine or Container Engine, which is Google's hosted Kubernetes environment, and it runs like, well, Google.
What about Visual Studio integration? Oh, it's there. I'm reading it now. You can use Visual Studio to manage your GCP resources and deploy your existing apps.
Yep, you can get stack driver logging, error reporting, and tracing support for .NET and .NET Core.
Also, there are PowerShell commandlets for GCP, which run on Windows and Linux.
And if you need help, there are a great set of partners to get workloads to GCP, including Capgemini, Nudezic, and Magenic.
So go to gcp.netrocks.com and get your free trial today.
.NET on Google. Who knew?
You're listening to .NET Rocks. Carl Franklin, Richard Campbell. We're here with a panel of three talking about serverless computing. Or is it really?
Somebody else's server computing.
Somebody else's server computing. So F# in the cloud.
Actually, not in the cloud, because that's the second part. So one part is the language, but the other one is also where do you write your code. So when functions came out of the box, it's like you had to go to the Azure portal, you had to write code in an online editor, and this is not what I want.
Yeah.
Like for many reasons, like the editor is okay, but like you mentioned in the plane, I don't want to be stuck, not being able to write code, to run it, and so all my code I write in code, like in VS Code.
Right.
Took a bit of effort, but that's also a place where I don't know how the other functions look, but like that was actually a bit of pain to find patterns on how to write that code, because it makes things easy, but out of the box, it's not completely obvious how you write code with your classical editor. So that's
But it eventually makes its way to the cloud, is what I'm saying.
So at that point, I use the command line, I write stuff, and then at some point you push it to GitHub, you do whatever, and it just runs.
Yeah, it just runs.
Yep.
That's kind of nice.
But in all these contexts, you're effectively stateless. Like if you write some F# code that opens up a file stream and tries to write to a file, when you push it up to Azure Functions, it's going to be sad.
The statelessness is interesting too, and forces you to write a bit differently. It's not quite the same as maybe actors in Erlang or things like that, but you have a bit of something like that. Every function will have like no state, so it fires, you run, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
So you can't keep anything in memory between the calls, which is great because then it's like you know that if it crashes, it doesn't matter. But then it's like if you need to maintain state, you need to maybe persist it and all these things. So it requires also a bit of rethinking on how you write your code.
Sure.
Well, not only that, but on Firebase, it's just a node module. That when you push it, your functions are just exports on a node module, and that's it. So you can send your node modules up, and I was going to try this, but I never did. I was wondering if I could write to the local directory.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you think,
Not knowing where it is.
you don't want to do that because that's actually defeating the point, because when heavy traffic and load comes in, they just spawn another node process to handle your functions.
Yeah.
And then you're dust. I mean, because then you have a whole other process that's not going to know what you're talking
So
about.
what were you trying to write to the local directory for?
There's a SQLite of document databases called NEDB, and it just writes to a text file.
But you could have easily used a service for that.
Oh, I could have. I just wanted to try and see what would happen.
I got you.
That was true. No, I like to see where things break.
Yeah.
In case you didn't know that.
But typically it's about, image files or stuff like that, the reason
exactly.
you'd write. But, we have this whole thing called the web.
Well, the Firebase storage, that's what they offer that for. So if you need to upload files, they give you a centralized spot. Yeah.
So, Lynn, what's the AWS story?
So the typical pattern is use S3 and make sure you encrypt if the data warrants that, or DynamoDB. But we did, in the big project I worked on, we did something weird because we had so much net new. And what we did is we used actually Aurora rather than DynamoDB.
What's Aurora?
Aurora is big SQL. Basically, it's big MySQL.
It's a bunch of lights in the sky.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
Anyway. So we put the CRUD lambdas in front, and it was almost like a stored procedure pattern
Oh, wow.
because it was less for the developers to learn,
Sure.
and it worked great. And Amazon, kind of had a conniption when they came out and looked at that because they said this is an anti-pattern, and then lo and behold, they now offer support for it.
Yeah, any pattern is anything we don't understand.
Right. Right up until it becomes a pattern. And what's the preferred language for Lambda?
We chose Node. Node really seems to have the broadest support. Python's right up there. Interestingly, though, Amazon just added support for C#,
Interesting.
which I thought was very, very clever of them.
And Google really likes C# these days, too, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
John Skeet, Chris Sells, and all those guys.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sabotage.
Yeah.
Are you eye rolling there, Mr. Connery?
No.
You ex-blue badge you.
Yes. No, I would never do such a thing.
Let's do it together, huh?
Okay.
I think it's really cool. I really do think it's cool that they're jumping on.
Yeah. Code in the language of your choice. Right?
But why not F#? That's what I'm wondering.
It'll come.
Oh, because F# sucks. That's I've got it. That's my thing. I got to get a dig on an F# every talk I give. I have to.
I was expecting such a nice panel, too.
Yeah,
And then I invited Rob Connery.
Yeah.
Sorry. Everything goes wrong after that. I want to jump back a little bit to this idea of like at 140 functions, it's almost like I have the stored procedure problem now where I have this huge, like in the end, the only way I'm going to find something is I had a good naming strategy. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? Is that how you manage that many, or is there a way to sort them?
So I didn't write that 140.
Okay. Let's go find that guy.
But I think that's a real problem too. So one of the things which is nice about functions is like each of them is completely independent.
Yes.
They live in their own world, and that's fine. But then if you start to have 10, 20 of them, it's like at some point, it's like, how the hell do you know this works? Like,
Right.
And it's very much convention based. Like I will say, I need a queue called foo, and the queue is there, and that's fine. And another one is looking for a queue called foo, and if I type something slightly misspelled is like maybe everything is broken and I don't quite know that.
Right.
But the flip side of this is like what I found interesting is like so again like you write the code, but like you have a very self-described system, and that every function also contains the bindings in a JSON file.
Right.
And so by looking at this, you can see what each function does. And with one of the things I built for myself is something which is going to scan every possible function and rebuild the whole application diagram.
Yeah.
And that's pretty awesome because with a classical application, you take it and there is no way you will get a diagram which shows you what the application does. And with this, is like I have names, I see that this one talks to this queue, talks there, and I can see immediately what the whole thing, how it's working. And
I would have thought that exists in the Azure portal. I mean, they would give you some sort of management software or management tools.
As far as I know, it's not there, but like I wrote this for myself, and like they thought it was a good idea, so maybe they will do it at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and at what point do you just say, well, let's use Service Fabric? I mean, that's what Service Fabric does. It does all that great management stuff for you.
Lynn, you were talking about when you had functions calling functions, you were not happy with the performance.
Right.
Do you run into this too, Matthias? Or do you have functions calling functions? Just
Yeah, like that's a nice thing. Is like a function is nice, but what's nice, especially in the Azure functions, it makes it very easy to pipe them together. Like,
right.
And so, but I don't have that type of problem. The performance at that point is like the queue or something like that, and maybe the cold start. But
and to be clear, it was in that one use case that we had
Right.
a problem. I've had other use cases that works fine.
And again, we get into this hierarchical model of functions. So what are endpoints? What are called into? And can we sort those things out? Can we see what's related to what and sort of get a view of the calling hierarchy?
yeah, and this is why I wanted that diagram, because like it's kind of implicit.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I really like that the natural tendency, and you're describing this very well, Rob, is that like as you solve one problem after next, you're making separate individual units that then could be sorted into any order or utilized in different ways or different purposes. Like I remember Scott Guthrie saying, I really want you to fall into the pit of success. Mm-hmm. That this tendency, the way it naturally wants to work, is a approach that will tend to encourage reuse, tend to keep simplicity a focus, that refactoring is not that big of a deal. Like I like everything about that, as long as I can keep it in order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually a problem I ran into. I mean, I like to talk well about Firebase, but there's also pain.
Sure.
You know, like evented programming is not always the easiest thing to understand. So I triggered a function when an invoice got written. And so the function would go off and it would send an email to the user and a few other things. And then at the very end, it would tag the invoice with email sent. So if you're triggering a function when the invoice is written and you write to that invoice at the very end of that function, guess what's going to happen next?
You're going to fire it again.
And you're going to fire it again and again and again and again. And I'm watching
Welcome
the
to
logs.
the happy loop.
And the logs are going off and I'm sending like 100 emails off to this test account. I'm like, oh my God.
What have I done?
If
and then
invoice contains email sent,
I'm like, where's
then-
the stop button? Where's the stop button? And so that's one thing you have to get used to is not doing that.
Right. Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time for me to take my Docker file back. Screw you guys. I'm going home.
Oh, he channeled his inner Cartman.
That's right. It's actually time to give away a de-experience subscription from Developer Express to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with DevExpress UI controls and libraries, and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best without limits or compromise. Learn more and download your free 30-day trial at devexpress.com/superhero.
Well, all right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Michael Orbenberger.
Big hand for Michael. No golf claps here today.
It's a full Monty. And Michael just won the DevExpress de-experience subscription just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, this is true, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of said fan club. But
Done
you
it
have
4
to
times.
sign up to win.
Yeah.
That's right. We've done it 4 times. We've given away $20,000 worth of stuff so far. And we like to ask our guests as well, if you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, Rob Connery, what would you buy?
An Xbox.
Nice. the Xbox X.
Oh yes, the Xbox One X.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
Versus
does look pretty
110.
cool.
It's $500, so you can get 10 of them.
Yeah, I'll do that.
A little
One
super
for
cutie
everybody.
box.
You get an Xbox. You
Yeah.
get an Xbox.
Give them away at Halloween.
That's right.
Yeah. How about you?
A 4K Xbox.
How about you, Lynn?
This is a weird answer because I've got a heavy travel schedule coming up. I'm flying all over the world. It's kind of an aside. I would buy airplane upgrades so I could get the technology in the airplane.
That's quality of life right there. That's what that is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
More business class tickets.
Mateus?
And I'd probably get a chair, like a good programming chair. That's underrated.
Look, these stools were the best we could do. I'm sorry.
It's funny when you talk about programming chairs. Of course, the Aeron, the Herman Miller Aeron, has been the reference chair since the .com boom, which is 17, 18 years ago now. I still have mine, which I picked up at like a fire sale after the .com boom was over, and they were cheap. But the only other chair I've seen in that class that's sort of newer is a chair called the Human Scale.
I need to check that
Sounds
out.
creepy.
$1,500 chair, and it looks like it's actually doing surgery on you when you sit on it. There's all these little knobs and bends and things in
Is
it.
it Japanese?
It is not.
Because they make all those crazy things.
Is it serverless?
No, it's not serverless. If it was Japanese, it'd have tentacles, and that's a different conversation. We should not go there. That's
something that
let's not do
blasts
that.
water.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that at all. We're going to move on past that. But we talk about being developers. Basic, day-to-day things. I love the 80% case. What do you do every day that matters? Great chair. Great keyboard. Like you can buy a $20 keyboard. Buy the $200 keyboard. You will be happier. And more screen space. More better monitors.
More Azure credits.
Better coffee machine.
Better coffee.
Because we all are just creatures that convert caffeine into code, right? I'm a big fan of I got the Dell 43-inch 4K, which is 100 DPI 4K monitor. That's a lot of monitor.
I'd like one of these.
Yeah. You code on that? So what is that, like a 20-foot projected display? And I'll tell you that projector back there that's filling that screen, that's not $5,000, man. That's more than that. Those are expensive projectors.
I could buy the lens.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or maybe the bulb. You could buy the bulb. All right, we got to get back to this because there's so much to talk about in this space. It's really interesting to me. I've been reading discussions around the sort of progressive web app. Serverless is going to be the new modern app. Like it's just going to be the browser calling to functions, nothing else.
With an icon on your phone.
Yeah. Disagree? No? You love it?
I don't know. I mean, like I was saying before, step by step, everything seemed to fall in place. And to Matthias's point, it felt fun.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't worrying about view template engines and everything else. I just was writing code, and I had a static site generating all the HTML. And then I was just using the Firebase SDK to talk to the database.
Maybe the only thing that makes you unhappy is HTML. Have you considered that?
Yeah.
It makes me unhappy.
Lots of things make me unhappy, unfortunately. It was. I felt like a hacker again. It's what I told a friend. Where back in the days of writing ASP Classic, you didn't care. You just wrote the code.
Right.
You didn't worry about anything else. And in this sense,
Nobody was ever going to see it.
Yeah, there's freedom to not knowing the patterns. There's freedom to not caring so much and just discovering something new. Like, oh, I could do that.
Yeah.
And I could pub sub over to the other app and do. Oh, wow, that's neat.
Maybe some of the weight on this is sort of that you may be doing something that's going to punish you later.
Yeah,
and
I'm good with that one. I'm really a champion at that one.
It's always the case, though. Like,
that's right. It's
my experience,
always
like whatever the pattern, at some point you will be punished
so
later.
I think the advantage of serverless is whoever's punished later, it's somebody else's fault. So
One-
then you're okay with it.
Yeah, one thing I did find, actually along those lines, I'm glad you brought it up, was I was trying to be a good object-oriented programmer and have my models and have everything in place with this Node app so I could just move it over. And it just, for some reason, was not fitting. It wasn't working. I don't know why. So I went to a more functional way of doing things, which is just the data comes out and I transform it and I put it back. And I don't have any models that represent the data. And that fit perfectly.
Interesting.
I don't know why. I
And you
really
still
don't know
diss an
why.
F-sharp after this
There you go.
statement.
Yeah, thanks for that. See, I knew it was coming.
But I would almost think the functional tendency of sort of approach it from an immutable perspective, right? I'm never going to modify anything. I'm going to output the changed thing. That to me speaks volumes of that service approach. It's naturally immutable.
Pass data in, transform, do something else.
Yes, and give it an output. Right? Don't modify. Give us an output that's a new incarnation. It's not your memory anyway. You don't care.
It's gone afterwards.
Where do you see it going? And each of you have done it on different platforms, and I'd like to know where the holes are, where you think things could be improved.
Well, something that I always think is a big part of serverless, I talked about in my talk that hasn't been mentioned here, is serverless to me is not just serverless compute, it's serverless data. And so, because I build these huge data pipelines for everything from social media to, sensor monitoring. And like on the Google ecosystem, they have a number of offerings around serverless data that I'm helping my customers to understand. So they have things like Bigtable, and I don't really know what it is in Azure, but Amazon has a similar type of thing, and BigQuery, and all these different sort of data services. So you ask, like, where are the vendors going to make their money?
Sure.
It's on these premium services.
Yeah.
And going really high level, machine learning. So I'm actually looking, we talk about immutable pieces. I'm looking at TensorFlow and MXNet, because those are distributed, immutable machine learning pieces. And again, the most premium services, and helping customers to figure out when and how to use those serverless services.
TensorFlow is a Google thing.
What did you call it?
Yeah.
Say it again. TensorFlow?
TensorFlow? Yeah. TensorFlow is distributed machine learning.
Okay.
Deep learning.
Yeah, deep learning. And
Deep learning,
MXNet for Amazon, and Azure has something.
So the equivalent to TensorFlow would be CNTK?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that's, to me, like kind of where the hotness is. Because I have a DBA background for the audience. I code, but I come more from a DevOps side. So that's a part of the serverless architectures that I'm doing a lot of work on.
Do you think that the machine learning part's sort of inevitable about being in the cloud anyway? It's like, I don't care what tech you use. If you store your data in the cloud, we're going to get you with the machine learning platform stuff.
Yeah.
And not in a bad way. I tried to do OLAP and machine learning related stuff in the 90s. I was a Ralph Kimball disciple, and those were all 2 comma number bets that you had to make in advance, where I'm looking at 30-something different potential mining algorithms, and I have to figure out which one I'm going to use because each one of them runs 3 or 4 days.
It would just be great if some of these things could be powered by machine learning and we didn't even know it, just like auto scaling, for example. Wouldn't it be great if just some robot took care of that for you?
Well, Google's actually suggesting to you on their instances what instance you should use. I mean, Amazon gives you this through their trusted advisor, but Google gives it to you in the UI and says, hey, you should switch to this machine type or this number of cores based on the workload we're seeing. And that's based on machine learning against your workload.
And Google also allows you to trigger a function based on, I kind of glossed over this, but Google Analytics events. You can craft up whatever analytics event you want to respond to, and a function will fire. And I mean, that's pretty insane stuff.
Yeah. That's more than the analytics. Analytics typically sounds like a read-only thing. That's real code.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I go back for a second to, so you mentioned the term serverless data. I have never heard that, and I don't understand what that is.
So what I mean by that is that rather than having like a database cluster that you manage, BigQuery is a good example of this, Google BigQuery. So it's been around a really long time. You just upload a CSV file and then you just enter ANSI SQL query against the data. I actually showed it in my serverless talk, 5 terabytes of data, going from 82 million rows down to 2,500 rows in less than 30 seconds for $5.
So it's not really the data, it's more a serverless query?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but different types of processing, whether it's SQL or machine learning.
So I guess the idea is you don't have to have a SQL manager or a management tool that you just express it in your code or your metadata.
But no clustering, no log shipping, no backups, no nothing.
Yeah.
This is game changer.
But you're paying for the persistence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you do want to keep that data around.
$5.
Yeah.
I like that price.
Well, I think more than anybody, Amazon has been driving this sort of race to the bottom in terms of pricing, especially for the infrastructure parts, right? The VMs have never been cheaper.
Right.
Where we're going to do differentiation is at the platform level, which I think is a strength of Google and Microsoft more than Amazon, but everybody's doing it because ultimately that's the value prop, and machine learning being the largest candy in the store here.
But on the serverless with machine learning, so there is a bit of a tension though, because so I guess it's like you could do serverless and expose pre-trained services as serverless. But if I'm going to do machine learning, typically I'm going to use something which is very CPU intensive, very long, and that kind of goes at odds with this. So
but not really, because it's GPUs as a service now. You can just add GPUs on, and all 3 of the vendors have machine learning as a service where you can host your own model up there. That's just straight machine learning. And then the TensorFlow and MXNet is the distributed.
Yep.
So if you're more computationally intensive, and they also have, if you have the standard models like vision or video or whatever, they have those too.
So it's like the way you use it would be serverless, but behind the scenes, it's probably not going to be serverless.
Well, it's just an endpoint for you. It's a black box.
What if you could do a serviceless service?
Now you're just getting weird. I actually think it's interesting when you mention the GPUs that, in theory, I guess the vendor is incented to execute any given function / lambda / whatever you want to call it as quickly as possible so you'll just run more.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting when we finally write one that just doesn't run that fast. Or how do we optimize this? Because I don't know that we have any visibility into that. Do you think that's actually a problem? And everything's running fast so far, right?
Well, again, from my production experience, we heavily relied on logs.
Right.
And now we have X-Ray, which is, I don't know what the equivalent is in Azure, but it's a tracing tool. So it shows you through your application what the latency is, where the latency is. It's relatively new, supporting Lambda, but super useful because we had to piece together the logs before it visualizes it for you and literally shows you a big arrow where the bottleneck is.
I wonder if App Insights would pick that up on the Azure side.
I know there are bindings
I think
to it,
it
but
does,
I haven't used it. But
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe it's
Firebase
there.
has a reporting tool that actually had a bug in it.
Nice.
Yeah, there's an article on Medium where this company said, its cost went up by 7,000%.
Yeah.
It's a long story, but it was a bug in the Firebase reporting tool. But anyway, they do have exactly that, where they show the median runtime of all your functions.
Right.
And so you can look at one and say, why is it running 3 seconds? But the interesting thing is they only charge you for CPU time. So if you're just waiting for an I/O round trip, which a lot of times you are, they don't say how they calculate that. So there's a lot of gray area in there. You know what I mean? Because the actual CPU runtime on a database call is, I don't know, not very
Fraction of a
much.
second, yeah.
But
Just
what's your
in
bill?
time.
What's your monthly bill? Like $20?
9 cents. That's my last. But I don't do very much. I serve files, and that's, and I have some functions running when like webhook comes in, and that's about it.
How efficient do you want to be, and how much time do you want to spend on optimization when you're in the single digits?
Yeah, single cents.
Yeah.
9 cents, and then they take 2% of that
Yeah, I
for
know.
a service charge.
Robbery.
Yeah.
The pricing model is interesting too. So I don't know how it looks on lambdas, but like on functions, is like what you pay for is like time and memory consumption. By default, it will cost you nothing. Like my first exposure to that was a Twitter bot, like where I had like 10 calls a month, and I was just hosting it on the cheapest possible machine I could, and that was like $12 a month.
Right.
So that's like very expensive per tweet. So I moved to the Azure functions and I got it to essentially zero. And that was nice. But like if it was a bigger unit, it's like the incentives is correctly aligned because I have to write code which is fast and which is like memory efficient.
Yeah.
So
And it'll actually reduce your charges, right?
Yep,
That's
exactly.
That's interesting.
if you do the right thing, is like
Yeah.
you will pay less.
You'll actually spend less. Although, again, chasing around after $12,
Have any of you used Cosmos DB?
Not yet.
Not yet.
kind of brand new, really.
We're just learning about it here.
Yeah. Came in the build time frame. I guess it's the pieces around it that matter because you don't have to think about scaling on the serverless part. So no more of this cloud front or any of those sorts of bits. It's just every call is independent and it calls as many times as you want. It's just going to light up more.
We talked about the time that it takes to spin up. How much time are we talking for an Azure function?
Like I think on a cold start, it's something of the order of 3 seconds. And I know that
3 seconds.
on a cold start. And that was, I know that because the other bots I was trying to do was against Slack, which has a timeout if you don't respond within 3. So the first call would have a problem, and afterwards it's perfectly fine.
But afterwards, what determines when it goes to sleep after you stop calling it for a period of time?
Yeah, like I think it's of the order of maybe half an hour or something like that.
Oh, that's not bad.
So if you have like, the reason I had the problem was again, like my bots were not very active.
Yeah.
So typically you hope that you have more activity than one call.
Is that per function, or is that another? I'm trying to figure out a way that I can make a dummy function or something like that I can call
It's
when I
keep
start
alive?
my app, like a keep alive.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
do a function which calls you a function to make sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or just pass in a certain value, and that tells it to not do anything.
But just wake up and stay
Return.
awake.
Yeah.
And you could avoid that as well, because like you have 2 modes. So I never remember how they're called, but it was called like dynamic and not dynamic. Essentially, the dynamic mode is where you pay only per usage, but you can also make it where you pay it's essentially on a VM.
Yeah.
And then you don't get the pay per use, but you don't get the cold start
That's the
either.
app services.
The
app services mode. Yeah. It's
if
unique
you're
to
re-
Azure. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
An app services mode where it is always lit. You're paying for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's always on as well.
I just realized that I sounded very first world problems when I said 3 seconds.
Yeah. yeah.
It's like it had to go to space, like the Louis CK thing, right?
You're in a chair in the sky.
Yeah, give it some slack, man. It's magic.
That's funny. What are you guys building next? You were working on an e-commerce pipeline, my friend.
Yeah, I'm just going to build it out, see how far it takes me. I'm just going to keep chipping away at it. And
Are you
It's
going to
not
call
the first time you've ridden that problem either, though.
yeah, it's unfortunately my albatross.
Are you going to call it e-commerce-thing.com?
Probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rob's
So,
e-commerce-thing.com.
Just, yeah, exactly.
I got it.
And you're just doing enterprise stuff, Lynn.
No, I have something really interesting I'm actually talking about on Friday, and I'm showing it. It's I'm working with National Research Institute in Australia, and I met them on a trip out there, and they wanted to move some work they had on-prem onto cloud, and it's genomic processing. It's a genomic. There's two types of genomic processing I'm going to show. One is for CRISPR, which is human genome editing for personalized medicine, and another one is a project we're working on with machine learning as a service, Databricks, which is really interesting.
Wow.
Spark, yeah. And that one is genomic sequence-wide studies, and this is being used in Australia for ALS research.
Awesome.
So some really cool stuff,
Trying to tear into that problem, which
Yeah.
is that's a big, complicated, hairy problem. Gias, anything coming up?
I'm currently using functions on something which is like machine learning essentially on an existing project. That's the one I was talking about where there's a service and I'm getting data. And essentially, I need to see like how long a car takes to go from here to here, and I'm getting real-time data and trying to adjust. As you get data, maybe a bridge is broken, and so I'm getting all this data in and trying to adjust the timing estimates I'm going to get.
Wow.
There's a lot in serverless that would lend itself to that massive scale type problems, like IoT issues. And it's interesting just to think about you're just going to do that. It's not, you're never going to know. You're just going to get a bigger bill.
Yeah.
Invoke it a lot.
Well, Matthias, Lynn, Rob, thanks very much for talking to us today, and everybody in the audience. How about a big round of applause for our panel?
And we'll see you next time on .NET
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a